I know it's been a week since this lot were revealed, but we're finally going to talk a little bit about the return of the Chaos Dwarves / Helsmiths of Hashut. It's been a little while because one of my kids has been really ill, so I've been looking after her, so I've not been able to do this, but it has given me time to really reflect on why, when these were revealed, I felt a little bit disappointed. See, when they did the reveal show, I streamed it, and I quite liked a lot of the stuff they showed off, but there was just a little part of me that wasn't fully on board, and it's taken a little bit of time to kind of work out why that was. Now, at the time, the fact that there's a significant slant towards like green flame effects is certainly part of it. I always associate green flame with warpstone, which makes sense, because that's what it has always been depicted as. Well, as far as I know. Anyway, it's pretty much green as the standard, but there is a particular faction that is extremely reliant on that in terms of their visual presentation, and that is Skaven. And seeing it used a lot in an army that isn't Skaven kind of gave me a weird bit of cognitive dissonance, where it's a case of, I know why, and I know it makes sense, but it still feels slightly off, even though I know the reason for it. Since then, I've seen a bunch of people take these pictures and change some of the lighting, change some of the colours, so that instead of them being green focused, they are more red focused, which, for whatever reason, I just find more easy to process. And I think, because of the name Helsmith, I keep thinking of a particularly real-world interpretation of hell, in terms of, fire, brimstone, lava, all that stuff, which I attribute as being more naturally flamey as opposed to warpstoney. And of course, in the context of AOS, that doesn't make any sense. I'm flat out willing to admit that straight off the bat. I'm attributing something from the real world to this fantasy setting that already has an established rule for how certain things look, and when it comes to warp stuff, in AOS at least, the thing that we see most often when it comes to natural warp resources, they're green. So it makes sense for them to be green. But for some reason, in my head, when it comes to this particular type of, when it comes to this faction as a whole, I kind of went in with an expectation which sort of coloured how I looked at everything that was released for them. Now, along with that, there's also the fact that they have really kind of adhered to the whole big hat aesthetic. They have stuck with, I think, what a lot of people really want from Chaos Dwarves, and they've made them, honestly, I won't say like retro in appearance, but these feel a bit more faithful to what I saw everyone else asking for, whereas what I was really after was more of the Forge World stuff that was previously available. So we're talking big siege engines that look like trains. I really liked the gun units that they had, where there was a kind of, it was like a helmet, but it had like a bunch of holes on one side, whereas they've really focused on a specific look for these, which at first I was like, oh, it's not actually what I was after, but it is. It feels like, at least, very faithful to what this army was for a long while. I mean, this is just the latest interpretation in a fairly long line of models like this, and so them sticking with a certain look, I mean, it does make sense, even if a little part of me was like, oh, that's not actually what I was hoping for. To be fair though, we do still have some fun siege engine-y stuff. Like, we have the Death Shrieker rocket battery, which I really like. I think it looks absolutely fantastic. I love the design of it. This is a very, very fun unit, and I kind of am really on board with these ones. I especially love the detail of the stabilizing drills on either side of it. That's just a nice thing to see. Just something a little bit extra that really adds to this thing. I also, for some reason, hadn't really considered the fact that when it comes to AOS, Games Workshop have a particular way of doing things. Well, not specific to AOS, I guess. It also applies to 40k as well, but they like doing the big centerpiece model where you've got something gargantuan right in the middle of your army. They like doing things that are maybe a little more fantastical than you might see in the old world or some of the old Warhammer Fantasy releases. So things like, instead of getting a land train with cannons on the front, we have things like this. This is the Dominator, and it's ridiculous. It's a silly model, it just is. But at the same time, I really like it. It's very fun. It feels very different to, again, those older offerings when it comes to Chaos Dwarves, but especially with this sort of thing, this is where it started to really hammer home to me that I was focusing too much on what I remember from looking at the old Forge World site and what was on there, and attributing too much of that to a faction that is not part of the game that those models were part of. I was still carrying the idea of fantasy into this. I was still carrying the idea of, well, if they could just make these in plastic. Whereas actually, they're not going to do that, are they? They're not going to just take it wholesale and transplant it in, because that's not what they've done for quite a long time. Anything that goes to AOS, unless you are the beastmen who go over to AOS and then get moved elsewhere again, they tend to do a reimagining, not a simple re-release, which is kind of what I'd initially thought they might go for. So something like this, whilst it might not be anything like what I thought they'd get, it does fit AOS, and it does fit the Helsmiths of Hashut. It doesn't fit the Chaos Dwarves, but they're not the same thing. They've been quite heavily delineated in many ways because AOS is such a different setting, and because everything is a bit more over the top, a bit more mad. I mean, it's one of the things I love about AOS, the fact that you can have elves on sharks fighting just dudes with guns, just regular humans with a shield and a gun fighting someone riding a giant turtle through the sky. It's ridiculous when you say it out loud like that, but it is also one of the most fun settings for me. And having had like a week to think about it and a week to sort of ruminate on these designs, the more I've kind of come to the conclusion that these weren't what I was initially after, right? These weren't what I was initially really hoping for, but they are very appropriate for the game system they're in. And despite the fact that they might be what I was initially going for, they are really quite fun in their own right. I've started to really, really like these in a way that I didn't initially when they were first presented. Like, look at these guys. These are really fun models. I think they've been done super well. The designs are really interesting. They have got some hefty, girthy lower bodies on these. They are very, very fun. They've kept things like the giant beards as much as they possibly can. The hats are suitably silly, but at the same time, not hugely over the top. They at least look like they wouldn't make your neck snap if you turn around too quickly, which is always a plus when you're going around giving things big hats. And despite things like the design of the weapons changing fairly significantly from what I remember from those Forge World kits, they still look decent and they still feel appropriate for the faction as a whole. Plus, they're sticking with some of that stuff that makes Chaos Dwarves fun. The fact that you've got all these hobgrots running around as well, which are borderline just Cruel Boy stuff, but with different weapons. I mean, it fits. It works. I say it fits. It fits the overall theme of the faction and where they've come from, what they've been inspired by. They look totally different to anything else that the Helsmiths of Hashut have got, but that makes sense. They would do. This is a different group, so yeah, they are going to look different. But they've kept that. And they've kept the way that there is that significant contrast in the army, which is really fun. Now, we did talk about a big centerpiece model before, and whilst that big mechanical bull with cannons for arms does kind of fit the bill, it doesn't fit the bill nearly as much as this, which I actually love this. I was going back and forth for a little bit. My initial reaction was, hell yeah, that's cool. Then I thought, is it a bit too much? Is it a bit too over the top? Is it a bit too abstract in a way? I mean, we've got a lot of smooth surfaces. This is clearly a forged, created being. It's very flat and line heavy in some areas, and does it work? Yeah, I think it does. I think it actually looks really, really good, and I think that in the middle of a massive group for this army, I mean, it's going to do what it's supposed to, which is give you that insane centerpiece. I mean, if you are someone who enjoys painting non-metallic metal, who enjoys that, really? Come on, raise your hand if you're someone who enjoys that. And if you do, why? This is going to be an insane model to see really skilled painters tackle. Like, there's going to be some absolutely mad paint schemes for these. And I'm kind of looking forward to seeing them. And I want to pick one of these up just to see what you can do with it. I guess having had a week of not being able to do very much except be in the same room for hours and hours upon end, making sure that everything's okay, only really being able to access stuff through my phone and tablet, I've watched a lot of videos, I've gone through a lot of the stuff that we saw from that preview show many times over at this point, and at the end of it all, I think I can understand why I was initially maybe a bit underwhelmed, but the more I've sat with it and the more I've looked at it, the more I feel like it might not be exactly what I was looking for. But I do think the Helsmiths of Hashut actually look pretty decent. It feels like they've got some nice classic design cues. The newer sort of Demon Engine things they've come out with look absolutely fantastic, and there are nods to the things that I really liked about that Forge World range that have been kept. As someone who's only ever really into that force from an aesthetic point of view, and until recently didn't know any of the background, I went into this preview with, I think, the wrong idea, because I was looking for things to be re-released as opposed to things to be reimagined. But now that I've actually appreciated them for what they are, and not for what I was vaguely hoping they might be, I think I've come to have a proper appreciation for these at this point. But that's just me. Let me know what you think of this lot in the comments down below. In the meantime, feel free to click all the things. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your patience this week. Things are hopefully slowly ramping up as my daughter gets better, so we'll hopefully be back into the swing of things today and tomorrow. Again, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you for the next one.